that bright enough? Okay. Nice coffee. So this is not the project I'm going to talk about, but I just want to use this to sort of to set up where I was coming from before showing you the process for this other project. So the way I used to work was like kind of how most people work, which is that you just sit there, maybe you do some research, but you try to come up with an idea, and that if you have creative block, it's because you can't come up with an idea. So if you can't come up with an idea, you're kind of screwed, and then maybe if you're lucky, you have something you can fall back on in lieu of an idea, and then you can sort of bullshit your way into saying you have an idea. So if you can't come up with one, you're like, okay, I'll just do like this kind of color blocking thing with accidents, grotesque, because I know that'll look good, and then I'll just come up with some reason that it's the right thing to do for this client, because I can't come up with an actual idea. This is not what happened here, but this was this show at the Soap Factory. I think this was the first project we did for them. And the show was like this group show, and one of the things that happened in it was that everybody kind of transformed stuff. Like that was the theme of the work. So like there was a chandelier made of hard candy, and it's the Soap Factory, it's in June, so it's humid as hell. So they knew that the thing would melt and that it would like drip and transform over the course of the show. So that sums it up maybe perfectly. There was some semblance of that with every single piece. So after we met with them, me and Kim just drove around and just talked about things we could do, like what could we transform and how could we do it? And the really simple thing we ended up coming up with was that we gave this piece of type to our friend John, and then said, can you make a drawing, like essentially was it a rubbing? I think he made a rubbing from it. I can't remember. He made this big, messy charcoal drawing for us. And then we just photographed that and then colored it gold. And like that was it. And our idea was like pretty simple. Like we'll take the type and then you'll transform it for us. And like that was like kind of the metaphor that we wanted to use. And the type is super simple because we were like, we'll let the concept kind of override the type in a way. Like if it's already being transformed, hopefully it'll be that much more apparent if we have the type be very simple and kind of clean. Though now it looks like a gravestone to me. I'm not sure if that was such an awesome idea. I mean, I like it, but I don't know. But it was sort of like we had one idea, like when you do something with type and then we're going to transform it. And it came down to this because we didn't have a lot of time to figure out what to do. And this seemed predictable, like this should turn out good and we won't have to scramble at the last minute if the drawing doesn't turn out good. Though we did scramble at the last minute to make it a black and gold duotone because we weren't happy with it up until like the 11th hour. But we didn't have any other idea. Like I think the only other idea we had was like to do something else that was much messier, but the same idea. So that was like one thing. And then a second one, look familiar, this was the following year? Yeah, it must have been. This show, The Erasers. I don't really remember what the show was about, except that in somewhere, somebody talked about this famous piece by Robert Rauschenberg called Erased de Kooning, where he, early on in his career, he went to Willem de Kooning, sort of like elder statesman of abstract expressionism, and told them that he wanted to erase one of his drawings and sell it. And that like his mark making would be to erase it. And de Kooning was at first insulted and then later found the thickest drawing he could find. And Rauschenberg spent something like 3 months or whatever erasing it. And then put it in a little, like in a really gaudy frame with a little plaque that said "Erased de Kooning." And so I believe the border was a reference to that, but it's been 4 years and I was just like I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I don't know if there's an idea here. And then there was this sort of gradient thing because it was like erasing. And originally it was supposed to have white ink instead of silver. And then it would be kind of more erased. But I don't know if that was the idea anymore. Like the idea is like so buried in my mind. I'm not sure what we were doing. All I know is that we were praying they would like it because it was the only thing we had made and I had no other ideas what to do. And like, you can already see a certain thing of like, we didn't make everything always centered stratum, but when in doubt, we'll center some stratum. And I think like, it's not even that I don't like this, it's just that I recognize that it's like compromised by my own lack of, what do you do when you're stuck? Like, it was so difficult to make this. Like, me and Kim would sit down and work on it for a half hour or so, and we'd be like, is it too minimal? Like, it's cool, but it's weird. Is it even an idea? It was just all kinds of fucked up. So that was us early on, like trying to figure out, not even early on. At that point, I'd been out of school for 8 years. So that's not a good excuse. But that was like kind of the process, was like hope for a good idea. And I didn't have a method for making ideas come to the surface. Like, I had to basically work really hard to make sure I could come up with an idea. And it didn't always work. So I'm gonna jump to another thing. I like how that's all very meta. Okay, so this is the project that we will talk about. So let's see, this is January of 2013. So the summer before this, I was teaching a professional practice class and asking students like about their process and how they would get their work done, and realized that like no one had a clue of what they were doing. Like, they had no process. And I was listening to it and I was just like, this sounds horrible. And I totally realized that they were describing my process, and that all of our process was basically do some research, hope for a good idea, try to make something, hope for the best. Like, that was the process, and that was totally my process. And at the time, I had been kind of resting on my laurels because I had discovered, like, when I worked in agency land, when I tried to make slick agency stuff, my work never got chosen for anything. And at one point, I left for a while and came back and decided to stop trying. Like, I would stop trying to make stuff that looked like it should be in a Target, and I would just do whatever I felt like. And then all of a sudden, things started like getting used in Target all the time. And I was like, so I had got to this point where I like was like, awesome, I'll just do whatever the hell I feel like. And eventually I realized that was like its own kind of laziness. Like, it was good for a year or two, but it was really lazy and stupid. And so when I was teaching this class, like, that's kind of the mode I was in. I was like, half, if I don't have an idea, I make weird stuff that I'm not sure about, or like, let's put some Helvetica on black, like Helvetica bold, all caps, beautiful. And either way, it wasn't terribly like rich. So I made a very conscious decision, like, I'm gonna start having a process that makes me explore more ideas. Even if I make the same stuff I would have made ordinarily, I'm gonna explore more ideas. And this was we had quit working for the soap factory for 2 years, and this is when we came back, and this was the first project. So they were used to, I'd show up with an 11 by 17 printout and be like, here's the thing we're gonna make, here's how it folds, blah, 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 here's what I was thinking. And they'd say, great, print it or whatever. And this one was a little bit different. So this is for an exhibition called R.U.R, and it was a group show. And what was it about? Basically, every artist worked with the idea of showing the hand of the artist in like a mechanical process. And there was kind of another thread about the deterioration of things, if that makes sense. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So, and this is the presentation I showed them. So the research involved like the press release from Ben, the curator. I think there was a podcast interview with him, so that gave some more context. Never mind that I met with him, so I knew what he was thinking about when he looked at this artist's work. And then making lots of notes and visiting every artist's site and trying to make Ben's connections real for me so that I would understand, like, when he says this, he means this, and I see that for myself. And then as I'm working, I'm trying to find quotes that can be my kind of guiding light for how I'm going to do this thing. So one was this one, direct work in the creation of the art object, meaning like, how do you show your hand when you're working? And then ever increasing quantities of the soon to be obsolete, which is like such a beautiful visual phrase. In both of those, the idea was that even if I didn't do any work after that, I could imagine solutions just based off those quotes. So these are scans from the notes that I was making at the time. So I'm just reading, and any idea that pops into my head, I'm like working with. You can see that quote like the first time it shows up right inside of there, direct work and creation of object. A question like, what is direct work? And like the first note I have is letraset. Like that could be it. And then I'm thinking about ideas of like, I could make a composition built from screen grabs of the design. So I would design, make screen grabs, and then piece those together rather than make it like final design. I'm making lists, just writing down ideas for myself. And then also, for some reason, I wrote R.U.R. a whole bunch of times. So maybe I was going to make the whole thing handwritten, like just handwrite the poster and then call it a day. And then obviously, ideas that are exciting to me are like get highlighted, though that's after this. And then I was also making lists. So at this point in time, I had this thing where I had to make, I would religiously made lists of things every day. So I'd make lists like, they would range from books I could write. Like I should write a new book. What are 10 books I could write if I wanted to like who are 10 friends and people whose work I could send them to try to get them to work. So like every day I was like breaking my brain trying to make lists. And then I would apply it to this. So the first one is 10 ways to do the soap factory poster. So it's like design a logo separately from the image. So one, that's not a way I normally work, like make a kind of iconic mark, but maybe I could do that and that would just be the main thing. I could make the type R.U.R. from broken pottery. There was like a potter in the show, so that sort of made sense. Photograph a broken pot. Use images of machines that gain sentience. So like go into pop culture and like find images of Hal and the War Games machine. Design a poster using an obsolete digital tool, which I don't remember what I thought I would do, but at this time I wasn't being practical. I just like was trying to fill up the page. And then another one was like, if all I could do is make an image, what would the 10 images be? So like a photograph of ruins or a collage of ruins, a building converted from ruins, smashed pottery, an arrow, I don't remember, knife, hammer, and nails. Interesting. Some of these I don't remember. A brain with wires, but I'm just like trying to come up with ideas. There was this photographer who had these amazing images of this thing called like the Lake of Hell or Hell's Mouth in Africa, and it's near where computers from like Western countries get dumped, and somewhere in Central Africa, and then people who basically live in this giant garbage dump strip those computers for copper and whatnot. And there's this horrible burning pit in the middle. And I thought like, oh, maybe I could just use one of that guy's photos. And then another one was like the idea of metal type, like letterpress, because then it would speak to design and it would be obsolete. And then the last one, which apparently I gave up on, which was this list of 10 final words. So I went back into this stuff and just started selecting out ways I might work. So the idea of tracking my movement through the design, obsolescence, direct work or handmade, something again that is like shows my hand, ruins, an after image, so like a trace of something. If you think about like those sort of ghosted signs downtown on buildings that used to be painted, I think that's what I was thinking of. Type only, image only, structural typography, and then I guess I pooped out after that. So I don't have any more ideas. So you remember Kevin showed this grid, right, of like how he was mashing together ideas initially. This is called a Bedno diagram, which was made by this this designer at Bedno, I think like in the 70s. And what he would do is like to force himself to come up with ideas, he'd make this diagram and then fill it in with all the stuff he was exploring, and then make sketches based on these like morphologies, basically. I picked it up from, I think it was a graphic design 1 class here where that's how we had to design logos. So you'd end up with easily 50 to 100 sketches for a logo, and every sketch would be fundamentally different because you'd have this list of images and keywords. So this ended up being the final set of kind of concepts: tracking, obsolescence, handmade, ruins, after image. And then there were these construction methods. So these were ways of putting that stuff into physical or like visual form. So type only, image only, structural typography, which I want to say was this idea, was like a kind of Swiss typography idea. And that might have just been because me and the Soap Factory like Swiss typography. And then industrial typography, because it's obsolete, right? In an ideal world, this whole thing would be filled with yellow marks, because I would have tried every single option until it yielded a result. But this is a little bit misleading, because you see there's only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these. I made a sketch of, say, tracking and obsolescence. I kept making sketches until I had one that worked. And then once I had one that worked, I checked off the box and then moved on to like another idea. So if I had done the whole thing, which who knows, probably would have yielded 100 sketches, I probably would have had to do 600 to 700 sketches to do that. Because like the way I was working is there's no way an idea would fail. I had to make an idea that kind of married those two pieces. And so this is the actual design directions. And so one thing I'll kind of point out, because this is a little bit out of order, is once I had those words, I then went and found other visual references that were like mood boards for that one word. And that's when you see images coming in through here, that's like where they're coming from. So I showed them unbelievably shitty pencil sketches. Which, probably would be better if it was slightly darker in here, but I don't think there's any more lights to kill. So, so like this one was, each one had a name. It was like plans and remains, and then it mentions which keywords work their way into the concept. So there's tracking, obsolescence, handmade, and structural typography. And the concept is like, the foreground is like a functional Swiss layout. So something like this, which is then replicated by hand using Letraset. And then the background is the layers of type used, but not the actual design. So, and the relationship between the two is akin to an architectural plan and physical ruins. We never see the design. So basically, I had this, I think it actually would have been a cool idea, but I was going to design the thing on the computer, rebuild it with Letraset, and then take the leftover scraps of Letraset and layer that under the computer designed thing. So there'd be this layer that was missing, which was the beautifully typeset Letraset composition. So this was this idea of like, how can I show my own work? I can show how I would think about this, and then I could show the leftovers, and that would be this way of like dealing with obsolescence, because obviously Letraset is not a cutting edge technology anymore. And it's handmade because there's the evidence that at one point it did something by hand. And the sketches attempt to be as real as possible in as much as they can. Like there is a line here for each of the artists. It's not like a guesstimate of how many, like it's exactly how many artists are there. It's a group show featuring, says the dates, opening reception, soapfactory.org. Like I know that there's not going to be anything else in this. And I think that's kind of critical, because that means like if I can do this, if they say yes, go and do that, I know I can execute it. Like there's no doubt in my mind. So the second one, raw tracks, which tracking obsolescence, handmade, and structural typography. It was a similar idea, but I was gonna dip my fingerprints and my fingers in black paint while I assembled it, so that it would be covered in these smudges that tracked me collaging this thing together. Which I like as an idea. I have no idea. No, I'm convinced it would have worked, but it was kind of a crazy idea. Then there was this junk drawer idea. You can always tell the last idea I had because it's the least finished. Like I go, oh, that makes sense, and then I stop. But it's also usually like 2:30 in the morning. So this one was based on ruins and industrial typography. And the concept would be each piece of information is laid in the style of vintage industrial typography. So I'm showing this to sort of say like, this is kind of the idea. There's going to be an icon for every single thing. And then these are typographic references. And then just it'd be like the name of the show, the subtitle, every single artist, so on and so forth. And then there was fading. So the concept here was like a faded piece of functionalist typography with all the relevant information repeated again in the style of a wall title in a gallery. So I wanted to do something around one of these ghosted after images, but but I was thinking about how to make it still like readable. And so one of the things I thought of was this sleeve by Peter Saville for a certain ratio that's supposed to look like you're like you're looking at a detail from a book, or you're in a museum looking at a corner of a piece of work. So everything is kind of in here. So the idea was like this stuff would look like this, and then this would just be like a museum caption. And this was like another reference to sort of like very classic type, even though it's a little bit crazy looking. And then another one was metal type. So the idea was to use a pencil drawing of metal type. So like I'd make a drawing that looks something like this. I actually showed an example of an old print shop just because I thought it helped get the idea of why you would do that across. This was a drawing from a skateboard from chocolate that was a similar kind of concept of like drawing metal type. And then this kind of classic justified type as being this treatment. One thing that is interesting is that already there are things happening that I would never ordinarily do. Like if they had said to do this, which I think was a super interesting option, I would have made something fundamentally different than what I normally make. And I think that the process is already like, was already changing how I was working in a healthy way. And then there was this one about called direct hand, which was tracking an image only. And so the idea was like, how do you indicate the direct hand in a digital environment? Like how does a designer show what they do physically? A painter leaves marks behind. So what I would do is use click tracking software, and every time I worked on the project, I'd have it turned on. And so I think this was an early one just to see if it would work. So basically this is my screen. And then because it's such a complex image, but also like seemed like an abstract painting, I was just gonna have super simple typography layered over it. And it would also be that kind of structural type. And then I had one other version of that where I would then take that drawing that the computer made and then make a painting of it. Because I don't know why, because I would be a glutton for punishment. Oh, and the typography would be made with a typewriter. So the whole thing would be like very human made, but also nostalgic and ridiculous. Just kind of fit with the art. And then there was an alternate where it would be like a calendar, and every time I worked would be documented throughout the design. So it would be like one of these illustrations in every single one of these boxes. Okay, so that's every option I showed them, which is a ridiculous 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different options. So normally they get one thing, it's finished, it's late, I hope they like it, because we're screwed if they don't. And this time they get 8 things. And they chose this one. So just to kind of show how that played out a little bit, let's go, oh wait, I want that back. So if you're gonna show super shitty pencil sketches, you have to have like a high level of confidence that you're gonna be able to make the thing. Because like I think, I don't know if we've talked about this idea where you're in a meeting with someone and you're proposing ideas and you get locked into something you've only talked about, and then you go and make it and it doesn't work. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, you come back with something totally different, and the other person who is vested in that idea because they helped you come up with it, they're like, hey, what happened to this thing we talked about? And you go like, oh, it didn't work, but I have this. And even if they're excited about the other thing, they're disappointed that the thing they helped sort of create never happened. So I try not to ever brainstorm in meetings. I just go like, oh yeah, I'll try that. Yeah, I'll try that. Yeah, I'll try that. But I'm also gonna try a bunch of other things. With this, to make sure it would happen, I had to make sure it would work. So these are the actual little graphs. So basically every time I worked on it, I would turn this thing on. This is probably the type tool in, or no, it's the arrow tool in InDesign. And this is like my hotspot. And anywhere where it's sitting was like because I was checking email or something. There we go. Yeah, some of them are really boring and the same looking. Really big black spots meant the mouse just sat there, and I was probably looking at paper samples. And so in the actual designs, all of this stuff was then composited into one layer. But it also meant that things made later were different. So there's like a poster, like a flyer, and then a screen printed poster, and the screen printed poster is made a couple weeks later. So it's actually different than the flyer because it has more layers to it. But it's also like those layers are very simple. Like this is probably the screen print. Oh, and these must have been like some of the early tests. So just to show that's like how that stuff worked. And then I'll pop out one more. Oh, okay. Oh, whoops. Oh, okay. So as I was working on it, it doesn't look exactly like the sketch, though it's fairly close. So I tried a bunch of different things because I wasn't necessarily sold on anything. Like I liked this version the best, so it was #1. But it was a little bit different than what we talked about because in the sketch, it's big and it fills up the whole frame. And in here, it's presented more like a piece of art. So this was one of them. So even though we've like done this thing that can be done, I'm still trying to make sure it's as good as it can be. So then here's another one where it's blown up and cropped. In theory, there was an idea that we could do 2 different versions. It'd be the 2 halves of it. So it'd be like 1 version and then 2. And then this sort of cropped version, which was kind of interesting. Another one. So there were these 5 versions that I sent to the soap factory, like, hey, I can't pick one. And then they picked this one. And I think what was cool was how much this ended up looking like. Aside from the background, it's even orange, which wasn't really intentional, but how much it ends up looking like the actual background. And so the things that were really helpful about this process is like, one, I made something I never would have made. I wouldn't have come up with this idea because I would have shot it down really quickly. But because I was using this grid, I was like trying to be faithful to, that's an interesting idea. How would I do it? And then I just sort of like found an application, of course, because there's something for everything that could do it. I think I found more than one way of actually handling this idea. And then the other thing is that the whole thing took 3 days maybe of like the presentation work. So, because I noticed they're dated. The lists were made on lunch breaks at Starbucks. And then the sketches were all just made in 1 day, like on a Friday night or something like that. So far less time than like that What Remains flyer like took us way too long of like making the type look really good and then scanning it and then photoshopping it, blah, blah, blah. And the other one took way too long. And everything we did for them always took way too long. And everything I ever do always takes way too long. And this happened in a few days. And then the actual design of this took a day, maybe, like over a couple of times, like trying it one way and then trying it another way the next day. There were absolutely no changes from them whatsoever, other than that they picked this particular version, which is really weird, because like normally people make some kind of change to things. And in general, since I like use this method in the shitty pencil sketches, nobody complains about anything ever. I don't know why, but it is awesome. I think it's because they see such a shitty sketch that it's like they've like practically made it. And it's not like you're sort of forcing something down someone's throat. And I think I told them, if you don't like any of this, it's fine. I'll go and make more. It's like not a big deal. Like this will be the research to figure out what we don't like. So it was very disarming. Not that that was like a tactic. It's just like how I felt at the time. I'm trying to think of anything else. The other thing that was really good about this was that I tend to work really, I say that I take forever, but like I don't really take forever. I just spend too much time on one version, but I kind of bang out the one version and then I don't feel like making changes. Like I'm not big into like tweaky changing over weeks at a time. Like if I get 3 weeks to do a project, I don't need 3 weeks. I just need the 3 weeks to find the hours to actually do it. In general, like most things take me a day. But this process kind of allowed it to be like, okay, can I do a lot more research while still designing really quickly? And then actually being locked into a sketch is helpful because I can't go and do something different because I just said, here's your 8 options, pick one. It'd be really messed up if I come back with something different. So, so it's like a little bit more risk-proof, I guess. So that is R.U.R. Thank you. Any questions? They didn't like the painting version. I think because it was like, it was too, they saw the one version of this in there and thought it was interesting anyway. And I think that it was this one by a long shot. Like Ben was just like, yep, that is the one. I think I was probably most excited. That's not true. I was really excited about like all of them. Like I was pretty down to do any of them. But this one like won so quickly. And I think he was just like, I don't see why you would do that. And I was like, well, because blah, 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 blah. I don't remember why, but I was relieved because like that would have added another couple of hours to figuring it out. And it probably would have looked terrible because I can't paint. So I'm trying to think of anything else. Any other questions? So I think the biggest thing is this process, I'm kind of convinced is like an absolute foil to a creative block. Like that, it's 99% impossible not to come up with an idea when at the very least you can take 2 okay ideas and jam them together and get somewhere interesting. And I've used this on stuff that's much slicker, where some of these grids are like more trend-based and they're to describe materials. So like designing packaging, it can be like multiple grids, and it'd be like, okay, like this kind of type with this kind of paper or something like that. And so it can be more sort of trend driven, but still do the same thing, which is that make sure you're trying out everything very roughly, rather than looking at that mood board and being like handcuffed by it. Instead, you have like the mood board to figure out, okay, chipboard, that's like an idea, or chipboard and die cuts, boom. And then you can match that up with something else that's maybe more conceptual, so that the whole point being that you get somewhere new and better than where you might ordinarily get. And then it's funny because they're stylistically diverse, but the Soap Factory still always picks the ones that look really Swiss. But at least it's like not my fault. It's like their fault. Like the one we did right after this was like a different kind of Swiss. It was very big Helvetica with a grid, but it was also another one that involved like some kind of data visualization. It was like mapping of relationships between artists. But again, it was like 1 of 10 options, and they just happened to pick the one that was like similar to the one they picked before. Any other questions?
I think you kind of touched on it, but say like you have a sketch, like pick this one, you tried it, and like you didn't know how to like create it. How do you then like, do you just go back to like, well, what are these other concepts, or like?
No, I'm stuck with it. So the sketch like has to work.
Yeah.
So like with the versions, when I showed them the 5 versions, this one I liked the best because it could fit the whole piece and it looked right, because the other ones don't look balanced. I guess this is actually kind of cool, but at the time it didn't really look balanced and it didn't show the whole screen. And even though we weren't going to tell anyone where the image came from, I liked the idea that you could explain it super simply. And so that if it didn't show the whole image, it wasn't as clear. So I think that was like probably when I sent the email, like, this doesn't look quite like this sketch, but I think it's the best way to go. But here's the other ones that do look like the sketch, and they're good too. So that was kind of the thinking. But I'm really careful not to show anything that I'm in doubt about the ability to make an even better version than I'm showing them. Like if somebody works with me on a project, like that's kind of the rule, is like, it has to be a shitty pencil sketch and you have to be 100% confident that you can make it with no kind of faltering. Like you need to make something that's way better than the pencil sketch. And if you can't do that, then we don't show the sketch because we don't have time to be like, oh, too bad, here's this other thing, you know, because that'd be shitty. Any other questions? All right, cool. Hopefully that is hopefully that's helpful. And yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think it's a BEDNO. Might be BEDNOW. I feel like he's fairly famous too, like as a designer and a design teacher from Philadelphia.
So you didn't feel that process helped you, you were sort of indifferent to which one was really you didn't have
Yes. Yeah,
to
totally.
impartial.
More impartial than normal. The other projects that we've done like that, it's always been kind of nice, like there's a surprise about like which one they pick, but also like, oh, cool, I was looking forward to doing that. And like when I look back through these, I actually end up wanting to make them. Like the first one, I'm like, oh, I feel like I should make that anyway, just because it would be kind of cool. But it's actually like a lot more gratifying to have a bunch of stuff I didn't make, but that I could, than the normal thing of the things you did make that then couldn't happen or got like compromised beyond belief. Because that always really sucks. So I actually like the idea that there's like a whole bunch of things that like maybe one day I'll make a bunch of speculative like soap factory posters that could have happened that are like relegated to pencil sketches, and I can go back and make them. But yeah, it totally helps with that. And especially like trying to generate a lot. Like ideally I would love to fill that grid and have the 400 or 500 sketches that it takes to get down to 10. Because the ideas were just way more interesting. And I feel like one of the things is that with this one, I let that process be very organic and I stayed true to it. But I could just as easily see taking a like, oh, what if we did this? And then marrying that with maybe ideas about how to approach the materials or typography, so that the concept could be like, I'm trying to think of like what's an obvious concept? Of course, I can't think of one now. Bullshit. All right, I wish I could think of like a super obvious like classic graphic design, big idea kind of concept, but you could then take that and then layer it with like materials or folds or something like that. And that could be the thing that you're using to sort of inject a surprise into it. So even if it was like a pastiche maybe, because that's like a kind of classic thing, like I'm gonna make a pastiche of like a 1940s diner menu. And then I'm gonna have like all these other ideas that could then infect that. Like maybe it's die cuts, different paper, foil stamps, and then start sketching out how that kind of stuff might work, especially if you're like me and you don't make slick stuff, because I really don't. I think I make like really rough stuff. So so I could use something like that to force a level of like slickness to the work that wouldn't normally be there, because it never occurs to me to use a foil stamp or a die cut. I just don't care about that kind of stuff. So yeah. Stop that.